everyone, and thank you so much for joining us on another episode of the KingsCrowd Startup Investor Podcast. Today, I am very lucky to be joined by Nathan Beckord, founder and CEO of Foundersuite. This should be an interesting conversation because Foundersuite is something that serves founders quite well when they're in the capital raising process, something that very much affects investors and founders. And so I'm excited to dive in, learn more about their solution and how it's helping to empower founders to have more effectiveness and more success in their capital raising efforts. So with that, I'd love to turn it over to Nathan. Nathan, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, for having me. I always enjoy it.
Absolutely. So for those who don't know about Foundersuite, tell us a little about yourself and a little bit about what you're building at Foundersuite.
Sure. Yeah. So my backstory is pretty straightforward. I went to college, got out of college, spent a little time in investment banking, helping companies raise later stage rounds, right? That's what investment bankers do. And even did a little time like helping companies go public. So that was kind of interesting. And then actually went earlier stage into the private placements world, which was helping companies raise like B, C, D mezzanine rounds. And then after that, I actually went even earlier and had a consulting business called Venture Archetypes that was helping companies raise like Series A and seed rounds. And then I kind of went all the way into it and started Foundersuite, which is now software and a database for startups raising capital. So really my whole career has kind of been helping companies raise capital in one way, shape, or another. So that's what I'm doing.
Well, I think something that would be really interesting for a lot of people is how are you, what problems are you solving for the founder that they're running into in the capital raising process?
Yeah, there are so many. How much time do we have? I used to help founders raise capital, and especially when I was helping them with the early stage raises. When I was doing the consulting, I'd get a company on board, and it's always first-time founders, right? Almost 99% of founders out there are basically first-time founders, first-time fundraisers. They haven't done it before. It's not rocket science, but it's also not entirely intuitive. There are a lot of nuances to raising capital that can trip you up if you do it wrong, right? And so, some of the problems are obviously identifying the right investors, right? That's always been a challenge. Who should I be going after as a founder raising capital? And so that's something we're trying to help solve with our database of investors, something you can come search and build a target list. The actual mechanics of running a fundraise are often very messy, right? You're talking to hundreds of investors in many cases. And every time you talk to an investor, it leads to 2 or 3 follow-up action items that have to happen. So there's a lot of activities that have to happen. Now, take that and compress it into a pretty tight time frame, ideally. If you're a founder, you don't want to be stretching your fundraising out over 9 months. You want to be doing it in 2 months or 3 months if you can. So you've got to do all this activity in a short time frame. So that's what we're kind of attacking with our CRM. And then there's just the ongoing kind of relationship building with investors, right? You should be, as a founder, building relationships with investors both way before fundraising and then after you raise capital. You should be kind of nurturing relationships for your next round. You should also be engaging your investors who wrote you a check. And so we've got some tools for that, like investor updates. So, there's just a lot of little, it's not one big problem. It's a lot of small and medium-sized problems that founders encounter when they're raising capital. Even our most recent product we launched in December was a data room, right? Pretty simple thing, but it's where you create folders, upload sensitive documents like intellectual property or your product roadmap or your confidential financials and stuff like that. And then you want to be able to share it with people and not let them download it or let them view it only or whatever. Just those little problems are kind of what you got to deal with as a founder, and that's what we're attacking through software.
Well, I'm sure a lot of folks, who listen to us are, maybe you're in sales or what have you. A fundraising round is essentially selling equity, right? You were a salesperson at the end of the day. And so what I think is really cool about your solution is you were essentially a Salesforce or HubSpot, but for founders who are selling equity, not selling a product, which I think is really, really cool and definitely helpful because you're right. There are so many touch points. I mean, I look back at all of the folks that I've talked to over the years. I mean, you're talking about a couple thousand folks since I started the company till now. And you're right. You spend most of the time being told no. And then, but all of those follow-ups, they eventually pay off, and you start getting more yeses from certain individuals and venture institutions. So I'd be really curious to hear from you. You obviously, with your software, I'm sure you just see thousands of founders utilizing your product, and you could see where some of them hit the pitfalls. Are there any things that differentiate those who kind of go through and have a successful fundraise versus those who seem to kind of falter or struggle along the way?
Yeah, there are a lot. One of the things I just kind of alluded to is like building relationships. Like um, the most successful, fastest to time to check founders that we see are the ones that started 6 months, 12 months, sometimes even years in advance before raising capital, right? They've been cultivating some investor relationships. I know some of our customers, as an extreme example, I know one of our customers, and I don't want to disclose the name, but he was working at a startup and he kind of like talked his way on to helping out with that startup's fundraise, right? The CEO and CFO were leading it, but that person kind of did a lot of the grunt work just to be involved in the process and get to know some investors. And then, 2 years later, he started his own startup. He had some investor relationships already made from the previous startup that he could kind of leverage. That's an extreme example. Not everyone can do that, of course, but even your average Joe founder can and should start building relationships with investors in your target vertical 6 to 12 months in advance. That's one of my favorite little hacks of fundraising. And you don't have to be asking them for a lot of time or attention. You can just kind of get on their radar and nurture that along a little bit, giving them some insights into what you're doing over time, sending a monthly or bi-monthly update on your progress. Things like that can really help kind of nurture those relationships. So then when you say, all right, it's fundraising time, you've got kind of a warmed up audience already, right? So that's something I see a lot of people do well. Now, conversely, you get the founder who is 3 weeks away from running out of money, and now they decide it's time to start fundraising. And what do? They just try and download like all our investors and do a mass blast and try and like just brute force it. That doesn't work very well for most of the time. So
Yeah, I can imagine. It's typically better to be chatting with them when you don't need the money. And then when it comes along time, when you're getting in the zone of needing money, to have that discussion, but already show them the progress points along the way. One of the other major inefficiencies I have found in capital raising is finding the right people. Who should I be talking to? Do they actually invest in what I'm doing? Half the time I feel like they say they're seed investors, but then their definition of seed is very different from someone else's definition of seed, and it's all over the map. How do you help map the capital raising process for founders and help them identify better targets to go after by beginning that outreach?
Yeah, that is hard. And so rewind the clock like 10 years ago or even longer, when I was helping startups with that, it was even harder before, right? Yeah, this is going to date me, but like way back when we used to go, I worked at an investment bank and we would go to the librarian office, for lack of a better term, right? And we would check out like the Pratt's Guide to Venture Capital on like CD-ROM, right? And it was like a CD-ROM of investors you go search through, and then of course, got a lot easier whenever VC had a website. And now, you've got Crunchbase, PitchBook, KingsCrowd, you've got AngelList, you've got Foundersuite. There was half a dozen or more places you can start to search for investors. And then that's good. That's good for everyone, right? Because it's a lot easier to at least start to build that list. Now, it still takes some time kind of culling that list, sorting through that list, qualifying the leads on that list. And you're right, like, you mentioned like stage is actually really tricky. We have ways to search by industry tags, type of investor, location, stage, we still don't have, even though we've been working on it, because like you just said, different investors just define stage differently. It's hard to really standardize across 200,000 investors what is a seed investor, right? I mean, and
Right.
so we're working on it. We're getting there, but it's even things like that are kind of hard to standardize. Yeah, what was the original question?
No, I think you hit on it. I'm also interested to ask you, when you think about connecting with venture funds and things of that nature, a lot of times it comes down to who you know and having an inside relationship to be able to connect with them. For founders who are starting out and they don't have those connections, they don't have that network, does creating that kind of email drip campaign, letting people know about what you're up to, trying to find ways to get them interested in grabbing coffee with you prior to you needing money, is that a way to kind of nurture and build a relationship? Do you see things that are key to success in building those cold intros into something that actually flourishes?
Yeah, you touched on several parts right there. I think the secret to building those connection points or connector paths is working the founders network in general, right? And that's why accelerators, I think, have been so successful in the past years, because it fosters this entrepreneurial network. But even if you're not an accelerator, you can and should reach out to founders in your space, socialize with them, pay it forward when you can, help them out when you can. Maybe, you're talking to a founder in fintech space and you're in fintech and they're looking for a great QA engineer and you happen to know someone, right? Pay it forward, make that intro. And then, later on, it's great to lean on those founders for those intro paths to investors. And that's one of the little tactics to talk about in this webinar we give our customers, where let's say you're trying to reach a very specific investor, research them and figure out what startups they've invested in the last 6 months or a year. Then cold reach out to those founders and start, get on a Zoom, take them out for coffee, take them out for lunch, whatever you can, right? Because then you've got that intro path into that target investor, because you get to know that founder. Founders are easy to get to know if you're a fellow founder, right? So it's a pretty nice little hack, so to speak.
I probably have my own answer on this, but I'd like to hear yours. Do you have a sense from your data, from your database, how many touch points it typically requires before folks will close an investor?
That is an interesting. I wish I had a hard number for you. I don't. I'm going to just kind of ballpark it from like my own experience and conversations. I'd say it's 6 to 7 in many cases, right? Just throw that out there. But yeah.
No, I think that's about exactly where I find it to be as well. In terms of your customer, right, which is the founder, is there a certain stage that folks are coming and utilizing your software for, or is this kind of any stage starting as early as kind of doing a friends and family round?
It's if we did a little pie chart of our customers, it's a pretty big wedge is going to be the seed stage, pre-seed and seed stage. So pretty early stuff. But we are getting later stage companies on there as well. And some of those are growing up with us on the platform. Like they started on seed and now they're on to raising Series A and Series B. And they already have all their investors in there. They have their whole history of 2 years of investor updates in there. That's kind of a cool little hack, right? Let's say you're raising a Series B now, and you can just give access to those guys, those Series B investors, like, hey, here's my 2 years of updates. You can follow along our entire history, and all our warts and problems over the last 2 years if you want to, right? That's powerful, right? Anyway, and then, I think at the other end of the spectrum, the really early stage folks, the friends and family, it still is good to run a process. I mean, if you're just raising 100K from Uncle Joe and Aunt Sally or whatever, right? Maybe you don't need any systems and tools, but even at the early stages, I think it's good to start developing that muscle habit of like building a pipeline, running a process, engaging people in a dedicated, disciplined way. So I think there's a pretty good argument even at the friends and family stage.
A lot of folks who listen into this are investors oftentimes in many startups. And one of the cool things about kind of raising from the retail environment is that you get a lot of people who really want to help, who want to be involved, who want to find ways to help. So if they're listening to this and they think, gee, maybe this tool could be really helpful for a few of the startups that I'm invested in. Is there a link? Is there something that they can share with the founders they're invested in to get them utilizing the Foundersuite product?
Yeah, we don't have like a referral link per se, but I would say, if you're, let's say you're an angel investor and you've got half a dozen portfolio companies that probably need a little structure in their lives, then, send them our URL or www.foundersuite, foundersuite.com, or even connect them to me, Nathan at foundersuite.com. Happy to help get set up. But the cool thing is those companies can each have their own account, set up their own pipelines, and then invite that angel investor to be a member of all their accounts. Now that angel investor can jump in between all 6 of her portfolio companies and see who's fundraising, who's making progress, who's maybe stalling or getting a little bit stale. Or if she really wants to, she can even set up what we call as an agent account, which we built for investment bankers. And she could actually have all those pipelines running under her account, and she could, help them populate their investor pipelines and stuff like that. So there's a lot of ways for angel investors, venture firms to work with their portfolio companies and give them a boost on their fundraising. So absolutely. Yeah.
Wow. That's really, really cool. I like that a lot. Listen, end of the day, I think every investor wants to make sure that their portfolio companies are successful. So you can help and say, hey, here's another way to help with your fundraising process, especially when you're kind of raising from, a mix of retail investor and institutional. Boy, does it get unwieldy. I definitely have experienced that myself and know how valuable that can be. Just keeping your head on straight, and so much of this is about investor relations. I know founders who do it really well. I know founders who don't do it so much. I definitely try and provide quarterly updates to all nearly 4,000 of our investors. And I try and provide updates at any major inflection point in our business if something big happens. Talk to me about some of the best practices you see in terms of investor relations when it comes to the startups that are doing really well.
Yeah. Now, well, I'll make you choose. Do you want to talk about kind of pre-funded investor relations or post-funded?
Let's talk about post-funded. Yeah.
Okay. So with pre-funded, I usually recommend the frequencies a little bit more often. With post-funded, I don't think it has to be quite as often. I actually, with our investors, we do quarterly updates. That's just the cadence that I kind of like. I like to do a quarterly update. We're not, moving so fast that I feel like monthly or bi-monthly are necessary. So quarterly is my cadence. And, it doesn't have to be complicated or challenging. In this quarterly update, I'll usually have a little summary paragraph up top, just like summarizing what happened, right? Good, bad, and ugly in one paragraph. And then I get into kind of key highlights. Let's get people excited now. What are the cool things that happened last quarter? New product releases, maybe any press, growth metrics, all that good stuff. Usually have a little metric section where we're talking about our, MRR, total cash on hand, churn, cost of acquisition, a few other things. Then we have, we'll usually have some product updates. So I'll put in a screenshot or product of like whatever new feature we've come out with. And then I get into kind of challenges. All right, what are we struggling with right now? And, I like to be pretty open kimono about our struggles. Like what's going on I'm keeping me up at night and turning my hair gray, even though I'm not as old as I look. And then, kind of getting into like how you can help, right? So specifically asking for help on either those challenges I just talked about or other stuff. Maybe it's recruiting or intros or whatever. And then sometimes I'll have a little bit of like looking ahead section, kind of just talking about like what's coming up next and what we're going to be working on. And that's it. So I can't really do the math. That's maybe six sections or something like that. It's not that hard to write. Each one can be just bullets. it doesn't have to be super eloquent prose, and it shouldn't take more than an hour or two to write that, right? But that structure is really helpful for people who have written you money or written you a check, given you money, and want to see you succeed. That's actionable for them. So yeah.
No, absolutely.
One last section I want to add. Oftentimes, maybe even after the ask for help, or even somewhere down, or sometimes even up top, I'll do a little thank you, like especially thanking the people who helped last quarter when I had challenges, right? Calling those names out up front. Thank you, John, for making the intro to our new head of sales, so on and so forth. That's really, really powerful. So
I like it. I think that sounds really, really good. It aligns pretty well with things that I typically like to do as well. Last question for you here. Obviously, there are a lot of inefficiencies in capital raising for founders. You're helping to solve for several of them, including this ability to really kind of control your funnel and manage process a lot more efficiently in a way that a traditional CRM just doesn't do. What other things would you like to solve for in the founder raising experience to make it more efficient and effective?
yeah, it's there's a lot of pain still, right? I feel like we're slowly and systematically tackling the pain points. Every year we come out with a product or two. Our most recent was this data room. So now when you get into due diligence, and you want to start sharing all the stuff, you kind of need a data room. And so we've got that on there. Thing I want to kind of solve in the future, it's still very hard. We talked about this a little bit. Still very hard to identify really good matches and, kind of find your connection paths to those investors. If there's anything more efficient to sort of, I don't think there's really, crowdfunding comes closest to kind of being a matchmaking vehicle between founders and investors. And, it has some advantages. I think you guys probably can talk about that more than I can. But there's still a lot of inefficiencies in identifying the right people, finding the right connection path to them, and then figuring out how to build that bridge to investors. And I think tech can help, at least for parts of that. So that's kind of some things we're thinking about. Yeah, that's probably enough right now.
Very cool. No, I appreciate it. Well, I've really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for so much for all of your thoughts on kind of the founder capital raising experience and that journey and what that looks like. For those who are interested, foundersuite.com. I think it's a wonderful solution and something that really can help founders. And if you're an investor, I think it's paramount to ask your founders if they're utilizing this product, and if not, getting them to use it, because it really is an effective tool for managing your capital raising process. And ultimately, we want companies to be successful in doing that, because that's the lifeblood of making sure they continue on and see their vision through. So Nathan, thank you so much. Any last words for the crowd?
No, just, it's never too early to start thinking about fundraising and building those relationships like we talked about, because it always takes longer and is harder than you expect it to be. So start early, check out KingsCrowd, check out Foundersuite. And I guess last words of advice, something I like to think about, like start to kind of pay it forward, start to build your founder karma bank, right? So, because you're going to require calling in a lot of favors when you actually start out fundraising. So start to sort of build the goodwill in advance, be helpful to everyone you can with other founders, and then that'll come back to you when you start fundraising. So I like that. Yeah.
Perfect. Start to pay it forward. I think that's a wonderful note to leave off on. Nathan, thank you so much for your time today, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks. Bye. Appreciate it.